I had a really interesting experience of being able to go play 3 hours of Onimusha Way of the Sword recently at a preview event, and I'm walking away from my experience pretty stoked for that video game. This is the first Onimusha game in literally 20 years, which is pretty wild. Well, there was a mobile game and a VR game. I don't think those really count in this case, but for all intents and purposes, this feels a little bit like a reboot of Onimusha. It feels like they're trying to reintroduce Onimusha to just the general gaming populace. There are a lot of people who have never played an Onimusha game. There are a lot of people who don't know the lineage of Onimusha as a franchise. Like, Onimusha started on the PS2 with Onimusha Warlords, I believe. That was a game that basically played like a dark fantasy Edo-era Japan version of Resident Evil. But most notably, the thing that it introduced, which I think is important, is this system that was called the Ishin system, which was a button that you could press when an enemy was coming at you with a sword, where you could parry away and then immediately kill that enemy. That is an idea that sounds rote at this point, but at the time was like very fresh and exciting. There are a lot of games with parry systems, obviously, before Onimusha, but this game, I think, really popularized it in a way that has kind of blossomed out to things like Sekiro, which is a game that I feel like everybody compares every game with a sword to at this point. Like, if you've played Sekiro, or if you've even heard of Sekiro, in some ways, I feel like it owes a little bit to Onimusha's parry system. So considering so much has changed in video games since the last Onimusha game, and especially since that first Onimusha game, what are they trying to do with this one? Like, what is the difference here? What is the differentiator in Way of the Sword versus any other game you could be playing, like Sekiro or like Beast of Reincarnation, which I just made a video about earlier this week? Let me read you a quote from producer Akihito Kadawaki in Game Informer, which I think is maybe a little bit illuminating. "We've built this game with the intention of essentially creating a new swordplay experience, the pinnacle of swordplay action games," which is a tall order. "Just releasing this game and it being cool for familiar players is not quite enough. We want this to be accessible to as many people as possible. So for people who are not familiar with action games, we want them to feel that they can jump in, explore, and enjoy this kind of game. We created the modular difficulty settings for that. We have story, we have action difficulty settings, and even between those, you can change the settings on a more granular scale. Hopefully we get as many people to enjoy the action and see the game through to the end, because there are a lot of people who do pick up these kinds of games, and then they can't see them through to the end because they're too difficult." In Onimusha Way of the Sword, you're playing as a guy named Miyamoto Musashi, who is a legendary sword fighter who existed in real life, as far as we're aware. He's a guy who was known for wielding 2 katanas at the same time, which is sick. Not verified, but legend has it he never lost a duel. He's that guy, you know what I mean? And especially if you've played, you know, he's in pop culture a lot. If you've played Brave Fencer Musashi on the PS1, that's literally that guy. You play as Musashi before the demo I had played, and before the demo you maybe have played if you played the public demo that's available right now. He dies at some point and is brought back with this gauntlet, which allows him to suck up the souls of like the demons and the Oni that he's fighting, which will keep him alive. It's a cursed trade-off, one that he hates. He is desperately trying to get this gauntlet off of his arm, but also not die. Understandable. My time with the game picks up right where the public demo leaves off. So if you've played the public demo, it's about like 30 to 40 minutes. They kind of teach you the combat, they teach you the ropes a little bit, and then you fight against a boss, Ganryu, right at the end of that. My demo picked up right after that demo. So like right when that ends, I move on and go into what was more of like a straight on level. Like it felt more like a kind of PS2-y level, which I really loved. And something I just want to note and keep in mind for when the full game comes out, because I think this is gonna probably be thematically interesting, but there's this thing in Japanese culture where sometimes like when a piece of like a bowl or a mug or something breaks, they will put it back together but use gold to fill in the cracks. It's called kintsugi, and there's a lot of kintsugi in the world design of Onimusha Way of the Sword, which I find very interesting. And even on Musashi himself, like he got killed, I think, by getting like ripped apart by Genma, which are the like evil kind of demons in this world. Even the places where he has scratches are now filled with gold, which I think is really interesting. But this more like linear piece of the video game, I was really enjoying, and this is where they're tutorializing the combat again. You know, they didn't assume that I had played the first demo, which I had, but like they were tutorializing the combat, which is like pretty, I think, straightforward, but there's a lot to talk about there. You're hitting stuff with a sword, but also if you press the L1 button, or if you hold the L1 button, you know, you hold your sword up so you can block. If you press it at the right time, that's how you parry. But you also have the circle button, which allows you to dodge out of the way. And then I think more interestingly is you hold down L1, and then if you press X at the right time, that allows you to very literally like deflect an enemy away from you. That's a little bit more timing based and a little bit more and less reliable than the parry at the same time, which is kind of a confusing thing to say. It's also worth noting that this is a game that is rewarding you for parrying. Like, it is leaning as far into parrying being the main mechanic of the video game as humanly possible. Again, very similar to Beast of Reincarnation, but what this game is doing is as you're parrying, it's filling up this gauge on the bottom that's called the blaze gauge, which I think represents your gauntlet. And as it continues to fill up, you will do more damage to enemies. So if you can continue to not take damage and parry correctly, you will do more damage. You can also use up the blaze gauge to use your Oni weapons, which I got to use 2 of throughout my experience playing this demo and had a great time with. The Oni weapons are very fun. Specifically, and this actually doesn't count as an Oni weapon, this is just a thing you can use at any time. You have an Oni bow that you get at one point, which, you just hold L2 and then press R2 to shoot an arrow. And boy, is this the bit where I think they really inject the like PS2 era camp into this game. Because let me do a brief aside. When you go to a preview event, this is the first preview event I've ever been to, I think there's this idea that they're like extravagant. It's not always the case. Like in this case, and this is the only one I've been to, but I just showed up at an office and they were like, hey, thanks for being here. And then they sat me down at a PS5 and then I played this game for 3 hours. I'm sitting in this room with all these other people playing Onimusha Wave the Sword. And every time I got a headshot on a demon with the Oni bow and their heads exploded, I laughed so hard. I thought it was the funniest thing in the world. It's like so over the top and so funny. I couldn't help but laugh, and no one else in the room was laughing like at any point while they were playing the game. I don't know. Anyway, they're teaching you all this stuff, and it leads up to this big boss fight against a giant Oni who likes to eat other Oni. This fight against Daidara is this creature's name, was so great. It kind of has like a giant bull Taurus kind of thing going on where it's like charging at you and you can like deflect it away as it's running at you. I loved this fight. It's a 2-phase fight. And I think it's just like wonderful tutorialization to make sure you understand how to use the parry system. I didn't find it particularly difficult. Like I didn't lose against this boss in particular. And honestly, difficulty is one note that I have about this game because I do feel like it's a little bit all over the place. And I'm curious, I didn't mess with those settings that the producer was talking about. And I'm curious to mess with those settings when I get my hands on the full game and see just how granular they get in terms of the difficulty. Because what I found is that this boss was like generally pretty easy. I just kind of flew through it. And basically every normal encounter I had in the game, I also thought was pretty easy. Like when I was running around the world and there were a bunch of demons and Genma that I needed to take out, like I didn't really have any issue with that at any point. And I was playing this game, there were 2 difficulties that they gave us. It was story difficulty and normal difficulty. And I was playing this on normal difficulty. I found it to be pretty easy overall until 2 specific moments, which I'll get to. Once you beat that boss, Daidara, that's where the game reveals its like pseudo open world, which I think is where the game lost me a little bit. So once you get through that bit, you get into Kyoto. And Kyoto is this like more open space with a bunch of like secrets and places you can run around in. There are people that you can say in side quests and all this stuff going on. But your main task is to close these big rifts that are just kind of like bleeding Genma and Oni out into the world. They give you these 3 points on the map and you can go check them out in any order. And when you get to a rift, you fight a bunch of demons that pop out of it. And then you close the rift and you move on to the next one. I didn't have any trouble at all with any of those rifts. Like that wasn't really an issue for me. I would say the like explorative element of it, I didn't find super rewarding. In fact, there was this one bit that I ran by a couple times where there was a woman hiding in her house and a bunch of Genma were like trying to bust down the door. And I went and fought them. And then I went into the house and I was like, hey, I saved your life. And she was like, thank you so much. And then gave me an item that I could turn in for a currency I'll talk about in a second. I saw that exact encounter 3 times in the exact same spot, like while I was doing this preview event, which I thought was interesting. Every single time there was a different woman inside the shack, but it did happen 3 times, and it reminded me a little bit of like Spider-Man 2 on the PS2, where like a little kid will lose their balloon every 15 minutes, and it's like, how many times do you want to go save this kid's balloon? Like you get something for doing it, and that's good. but I'm hoping that there's a little bit more variety in the full game. But the idea of the open world, as far as I was able to understand just from playing through it, was that you're supposed to be running around and poking at all of its corners and trying to find as many secrets as possible. And that item that woman gave me when I saved her, you can turn in for a currency that's called favor, which you can use to buy a bunch of different things and, upgrade your sword, stuff like that. Speaking to the video gaminess of it, when you defeat enemies also, they just kind of erupt in a bunch of different colored orbs. There's blue ones, which fill up your blaze gauge or your Oni weapon gauge. Yellow ones, which will give you health. And then red ones, which you can also use as currency. And all of this stuff kind of feeds into the skill tree system as well. There's like a big skill tree that'll allow you to get new abilities and upgrade your abilities and all this stuff to kind of, build your own version of Musashi, which I think is going to be really fun to build out. Personally, you're just looking through it. It's not like 0.05% stat increases on critical hit chance. It's like real stuff, which I think is the right way of doing a skill tree. Also, while you're in this open zone version of Kyoto, they unlock the ability to have you do rematches against bosses you've already defeated, which is a really fun idea, which also gives you a bunch of different rewards. So I'll be interested to see how compelling and how much I want to spend time doing the open zone running around stuff. Because I found myself actually more interested in the story and the narrative and these characters, and I wanted to see more of the game's world. I think in general, this feels like a game that's made for adults, which I think is interesting. Just in the way the narrative kind of unfolds and the way these characters speak to one another and the way cutscenes play out. It does feel like a game that's taking itself seriously, despite having these elements of camp and fun and kind of over the topness that are happening all the time. It's worth mentioning, Kyoto is like bombed out. I mean, you're probably seeing the footage right now. Kyoto like doesn't look good, but in this one area, it's overgrown and it's verdant and it's beautiful. And it's like almost like wrong how beautiful it looks. Like it kind of looks fantastical because clearly whatever demon is here is casting some kind of, curse or spell or magic in the area to make people believe that everything is great, even when it isn't. So this demon is granting wishes here and there. And of course, it's like classic monkey's paw stuff. This Oni that you need to fight is named Rashogan, and man, is this where the difficulty suddenly ratcheted up for me. I went from being like, this game is too easy to like, okay, well, there's something happening here. It took me a couple attempts. I think probably like 4 or 5 attempts to fight this boss. I kept making it to the second phase of the fight and then losing, which was super frustrating. But also it wasn't frustrating in a way that made me want to put the game down. It's frustrating in the way all good boss fights are frustrating, where you can do it and you just need to learn a couple of the moves here and there, and you'll probably make it work eventually if you just kind of keep banging your head against it. It turned out that I just wasn't parrying and deflecting enough, which of course that's the vocabulary of the game is parrying enemy attacks, and I just wasn't doing it consistently enough. And that was more on me than it was on the video game. And I think that's where Onimusha Way of the Sword really started to get its hooks into me. I think that's where I really started to come around on it. Ironically, despite losing over and over again, I was like, I'm really enjoying this process of losing over and over again, and I want to get better at it. I feel like when you're playing a Souls-like or something that is inspired by a Souls-like, you usually have 2 kinds of bosses. There's either the ones where you fight and you lose and you're just kind of banging your head against it, but eventually when you get to the other side, you're like, yes, I did this. This is great. And then there are the other ones, which I think are the more poorly designed ones, or the ones that just get in your head in particular, where when you get far enough into the fight and you've lost enough times when you defeat it, you don't even feel that sense of satisfaction. You just are numb and you just move on and you keep playing the game. I did not have that experience at all playing Way of the Sword. Between the first fight, this Rashogan fight, and then the third fight, which ended this demo, in all 3 instances, I was like, this is fair, this is fun, I'm having a good time, even while I'm losing, which is, I think, the most you can ask for. Even that boss fight in the publicly available demo, the Ganryu one, that one isn't particularly difficult, but it is really fun to learn, right? I think when I played it, I only lost once and then I succeeded on the second time, but I had a really good time with that fight, because I think the boss design is really fun. Again, the way he moves around is really fun, but also just the combat is exciting and you feel like you can express yourself through that combat. And it still kind of has elements of a PS2-y thing, but it obviously feels modernized in the way that you would hope for. Also, a fun note about Ganryu as Musashi's rival in this game, in the legend at least, the real Musashi's most famous duel happened on an island called Ganryujima. So having this character named after the island where Musashi had his most famous duel, it's a nice touch. I think overall I'm walking away from this experience feeling pretty optimistic about this game. I'm really excited to get my hands on the final thing and see it all the way through. I think there's going to be a lot of fun to be had here, and I'm curious to see specifically how the give and take between the open world zones, or the open zones, I should say, and the more linear pieces of the game kind of have a give and take there. Because I will say, from my experience, the more linear stuff actually appealed to me more. Like, I almost wished it was more PS2-y in those ways. That first bit leading up to that first boss fight was really great. And then there's the open zone area where you fight against Rashogan. And then after that, there's another more linear trek to the third boss. And I liked those two linear bits a lot more than I liked the open zone part. So I'm curious to see if when the full game is out, if I turn around on that. Like, you know, again, this was a preview event. I had 3 hours max to play this game. I just didn't feel like I could spend as much time as I would have liked to, you know, exploring. And I think when you have the full game in your hands and, you know, you want to make the most of your time with it, you will probably do a lot more exploring than I did. So I'm hopeful that that side of the game will work better for me when the full release is out. Either way, excited for this game to come out. It's like coming out relatively soon. It's about a month from now. So not gonna have to wait too long to play more Onimusha Way of the Sword. Pretty wild. Also, wild to go to a preview event. Never thought I would do that in my life. Thanks so much for watching this one. Like, comment, subscribe, dude. I mean, you've watched YouTube videos before. It really helped the channel if you did all those things. It would. And now I'm gonna go.